All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I have with you Dr. Michael Hendren, who is not a benzodiazepine expert or somebody from the Alliance for Benzodiazepine Best Practices. It is actually my dad. Hi, Dad.
Hi.
So just so you know, he is a doctor of chiropractic. And also, just so you know, my camera is really squonky here and my face is super bright for some reason. I'm not trying to filter out wrinkles or anything like that. But if you're wondering where I get some of my camera ready looks from and my ability to speak in front of a camera, that comes from my dad. He is an eloquent speaker and very knowledgeable in a lot of ways, just from his experience being a chiropractor and, of course, watching me, his daughter, go through this. So I thought we could just kind of dig into this today and go into what it was like for him to watch a loved one go through this and see if there's anything helpful for you family members who have loved ones going through this. So thank you for joining us, Dad. I appreciate you being willing to have this discussion with us.
You're welcome.
So just to kind of give a little bit of a background, I used to work in your office. I would be there when people would come in and you would ask them to give you a list of the medications that they were on. And I noticed that a lot of times you would point out to people that there were conflicts sometimes between the different medications that they'd been prescribed. So sometimes in a way you were kind of the frontline person in recognizing maybe sometimes when there were some issues with people's prescriptions.
Well, that was the case. Sometimes I would always take a proper history, find out what they were included, what kind of medications they were taking. If I saw something on the list that I thought might be questionable, that maybe their doctor should know, I would write the list for them and say, show it to your doctor, go over it with your doctor, be sure this is what he wants. I was concerned about duplications or maybe medications that might work with each other. I never told patients to stop taking medications. If I saw something concern me, I would do that, send them back to their doctor.
Right. I think a lot of people don't actually know how educated chiropractors are about medications and things like that. When you had to do quite extensive testing and things to renew your license when you moved out to Utah, because I grew up in Colorado. That's where your main practice was, but you had to do quite extensive testing, didn't you, to learn a lot of things that medical professionals learn?
Well, when you get through school, you have to take a national board exam, and it's not easy. It's a very difficult process.
Yeah.
So you had to, the schooling was important. 4 years of chiropractic school takes time. You go through all the systems, anatomy of every system, physiology of every system, pathology of every system, plus other classes that are pertinent to chiropractors. So yeah, there was a lot there. You had to learn it all. If you didn't, you would not be able to pass the board exams.
Right. And that kind of education actually led to you being the person who did medical intakes for people coming in. When you were here in Utah, you worked for a rather large trucking company. And so you would take people's medical histories and do those kinds of exams and things, correct? When these new truckers or people would seek employment with this trucking company.
Yeah, truck drivers have to have a physical examination at least every 2 years. Most probably every year, and some more often depending on their medical condition. Anybody who does the exam has to get certified and take tests. So yes, you have to be prepared and you have to be knowledgeable on the subject in order to pass the test to get certified. So I am certified by the national organization to do the test physical examinations for truck drivers. That is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration that requires that. And they make recommendations and rules so that there are guidelines for truckers and what they need to be able to do to be qualified to drive.
Right. And one of the things that I was interested to find out as you did this work is that your company specifically, I believe, had a policy where people could not drive or weren't allowed to drive these big rigs if they were taking certain medications, specifically benzodiazepines.
That's one of them. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration issued recommendations and left it to the companies. So the companies had to take responsibility. The federal agency took very few responsibilities. They made few exact rules about driving that had to do with medications or had to do with medical issues or problems. They made recommendations based on bringing doctors together and doing studies and issuing their recommendations. The company I worked for decided that they would follow the recommendation issued by that federal group. And so it applied to medical conditions and medications. Benzodiazepines were one of the medications that were on the list. And per their recommendations, drivers who took benzodiazepines were not allowed to drive.
That's interesting that the federal government, right, doesn't really state anything definitive. I wonder how much of that has to do with the fact that the pharmaceutical industry has such clout and has so many lobbyists and things like that in our government.
Yeah. Well, I think it has more to do with liability. They don't want to be responsible for it. They will make recommendations and let the companies deal with it. And if drivers don't like it, they have to deal with it. The company has to deal with it, not the federal government.
Yeah, that's true. But I do know that in the UK, they have something similar there, that people who drive public transport aren't allowed to be on benzodiazepines. So it's a bit more than a recommendation. And obviously, there must be a good reason for that, right?
Yes, obviously, because of its effects on people. And so, they understand the potential effects that these can have. The drivers out there driving for many hours at a time. There are rules that they have made regarding rest hours, how many hours in a row they can drive, and how much time they need off in order to qualify to drive again. So they make specific rules about that, but they're well aware of the effects of these medications and the lingering effects if they do take it, and that it is a potential danger if they drive while taking these medications. So they make their recommendations based on that. Benzodiazepines is one of them. Narcotic medications another. There are other medications. So they're good recommendations. They do apply. When I spoke to drivers or potential drivers about these things, often they would argue about it. Say, well, it doesn't affect me. But that may be, but it could affect people. I never had a single driver ever tell me, oh, yes, the medication I take affects me in such a way that I cannot drive. Never once. I spoke to over 20,000 drivers and potential drivers who were applying for jobs. Not a single one ever told me that their medication affected them adversely. They all said they were just fine with it. So it comes down to a person with training being able to make the proper decision.
Right. And I don't know that ever happens outside of your kind of situation, I guess, in the medical profession, because looking back now, right now that I'm off the medication and I can see, obviously these medications did impact me. Even the antidepressant that I was taking, I can look back now and see how it affected my judgment, how it affected memory loss, things like that, just perception. You don't actually realize, I think, for the most part, how these drugs are affecting you until you get off them and have that perspective. And so, yeah, again, I'm not saying that maybe everybody who's on these shouldn't be driving, but there's really no way to know, because these drugs are impacting you in such a way that you are not aware of the impact. So that's a really, really tricky, that would be really tricky to determine, I think, for anyone, both as an observer and as someone going through that. I know also that you you didn't just evaluate for safety with regard to narcotics and benzodiazepines. You really were seeing the whole picture, and you saw people coming in prescribed all kinds of medications. And I just wanted to ask, before we sort of get onto my personal story here, when you saw all these people coming in, were there any things that you noticed that kind of made you maybe wonder a little bit at some of these prescriptions that people were taking? Or
part of my job was to screen them before they came to the company's school. The company had their own school, and so the company wanted to be sure they didn't arrive and get disqualified at the time of the examination because of the medications they were taking. So part of my job was to talk to them ahead of time and to discuss their medications with them.
Right, because I would assume when somebody comes in and they're like on an antipsychotic, you would kind of wonder, well, what is the reasoning behind this? But it wasn't necessarily always because somebody was diagnosed with something like psychosis, right?
Yeah, we want to know why they're taking it and how it affects them. So with the medication being acceptable, I would still want the doctor to say, yes, they're good to go with this medication and do your kind of work.
Right. So just out of curiosity, tell us about how many people you actually saw during the course of, I don't remember how many years you worked there, but during that course of time, how many you saw, and how many of those do you kind of guesstimate were actually prescribed psychiatric medications?
Well, I don't know how many I examined because I don't have specific numbers on examinations, but I examined many hundreds of drivers over the years. It was about an 8-year period, I believe, 9-year period. In that same 9-year period, I did keep track of those that I spoke with. And that was over, as I said, over 20,000 drivers and potential drivers. Antipsychotic medications for depression, there were many, many people taking those. It was very common. It wasn't a rare situation. So it was one that we had to deal with a lot of the time. I would say that 60% of the time, either an examination or talking with somebody on the phone, the issue of depression or some kind of medication for depression would come up, and probably even more often with women.
Right, which statistically is the case. Women are prescribed these more than men, and statistically, women over 40, at least 1 in 4 women over 40 are prescribed these drugs. So it's like you said, it's definitely not uncommon. These are commonly prescribed. And I know, I guess just kind of growing up with a dad who's a chiropractor, I kind of just had this sense of like the medical profession is not infallible. They make a lot of mistakes a lot of the time, because we would see that a lot, sort of the after effects or the side effects of medical treatment. So that kind of made me wary to begin with. And I know just from having conversations with you, I think there were often times where you would see people being prescribed things and you would kind of scratch your head and wonder, is this really responsible medicine that's going on here? Or you can't, a person like me, couldn't really know just by talking to somebody over the phone. Again, sometimes I would scratch my head and wonder. I said earlier, 60% of the people were taking those kinds of medications. I would correct that, not say 60%, but when I was dealing with those kinds of situations, medications, they took more time. And with drivers who were already out there driving, so it was about 60% of my time I was dealing with those kinds of situations and those kinds of medications. So they did take up more time to make sure that everything was okay and get them cleared to drive. So there are issues that have to be dealt with. Those medications, one might think that only a psychiatrist can prescribe certain medications. Well, anybody that can prescribe anything. And so they do that, and it's their judgment call. But I do wonder,
One example that I've given to people over the years, always stuck in my mind, is that in a 2-week period, I remember speaking to 3 men who were applying for a job as a truck driver. So in that 3 men in a 2-week period, all 3 of the men were in their 50s. All 3 of those men had been taking antidepressant for 4 to 6 months because their mother died. And something like that would make me kind of scratch my head. Is that really necessary? Isn't dying is just part of what we deal with in life. And when a man is in his 50s, his mother is going to be at least in her 70s. He should expect that that could happen. And that's the natural part of what you deal with. But for some reason, if a person has any difficulty at all dealing with death, the first thing is, well, try an antidepressant. And so I wonder, is that really necessary? Or maybe they just need to learn to deal with it, because that is a natural process. But these 3 men were all taking antidepressants because mom died.
And I think that speaks to the philosophy of our society, I think much of which has been influenced by the pharmaceutical industry. And that is the idea that somehow pain is actually a bad thing, right? Whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, that it's wrong. That it's wrong almost to feel something like that or allow someone to experience that for any extended period of time. And so the moral thing to do is to take away that pain in any way we possibly can. Take that away. When, like you said, gosh, that's a part of life. That's something everybody at some point is going to have to experience and learn how to emotionally evolve from, right? We tend to grow from these experiences. And so to deprive somebody of that, not only through medication, but then medication that could potentially harm them in the long run, which, as you and I both know from my experiences, is definitely a potential risk for a large minority of people. That does seem that is questionable, I guess.
I wonder. But then again, it's a judgment call.
Yeah.
All that doctor has to make. Hopefully, he's making the right decision.
Well, speaking of which, what were you going to say? Sorry.
Well, he has to make the right decision, and I hope they are. I hope they're making the right decision, but I wonder about sometimes how they prescribe.
Well, in my experience, they prescribe based on the knowledge they have. I mean, so going back to my story in 2010, which was the second time I'd been prescribed Ativan long-term, or not Ativan, excuse me, Ambien. The first time I went through some withdrawals, there were some things, but it wasn't like the second time with my daughter. I was having insomnia, right? And so I'm told by my doctor that if I take Ambien, it's not going to get through my breast milk. Like, just like I was told by my first doctor, oh, it won't go through the placenta. But in hindsight, looking back at both experiences with my son and my daughter, obviously in my case, it did. Perhaps not in everyone's case. Maybe that's why some people are safer to drive on these drugs, depending on how they metabolize it. But for me, obviously it affected my son. He went through withdrawals as a baby. Obviously it was affecting my daughter, because after a few days on it, she was sleeping all the time, when before this she was alert. And so because I could tell it was impacting her, I cold turkeyed off that for the second time after about maybe 5 days of taking Ambien. So that's when I first experienced this really severe syndrome, right? Where I'm just having so many health issues. But I think from your perspective, probably all you saw was that, well, my daughter's dealing with really, really bad insomnia. Like even I think at the time didn't really have a good narrative for what was going on. What was your experience?
Well, in watching you, it was a kind of a year-by-year process.
Yeah.
To begin with, there was the issue with insomnia. Well, the expectation, well, that would go away. Things would correct themselves. They weren't correcting themselves. And then one thing after another, and then Ambien, and then benzodiazepine to help that. And then the benzodiazepine became a problem itself. And then you trying to get off the benzodiazepine. seen symptoms I had never seen before, and not having any experience with that. Hoping that as you dealt with practitioners who try to help you to deal with it, that they could do what they were doing. So we were talking about a period of years here. Mm-hmm. And then you trying to get off the benzodiazepine. I don't know of any real protocol the medical profession has for taking someone off benzodiazepine. I imagine it comes right again down to the individual practitioner making their best judgment call. I think in their minds, well, not too hard, cut it in half, and then for a while, and then they stop. That might work with some people, or maybe the majority of people. But you have this small group of people that doesn't work for. And the reactions that they have and the dependency they have is significant. That it should be studied and dealt with, and the information should be put out there to doctors who prescribe, to understand that for a group of people who try to come off benzodiazepine medications, it can be very, very dangerous. And that was our experience with you as your mother and I tried to deal with what was going on. We didn't understand it. We just tried to be supportive, but saw what happened over the period of time. Times when you could not function, you could not get through the day. Sometimes you just lay on the floor and just try to gather yourself. So it was a frightening process to see. And I was very impressed by the way you were able to find a way to taper off the medication on your own. And grateful that there was finally one doctor who was willing to cooperate with you, because that's what it takes. The medication has to continue to be prescribed so the person can very slowly taper off it. You don't just cut a pill into fourths. I mean, you can't cut a pill into 20ths. And so the pill has to be broken down into liquid form and taken a very, very small amount at a time. And that takes it's a long process for you. As I recall, it was 14 months of tapering off the medication and still effects after that. So the healing process has been very long.
Yeah, there's so much actually to address there in everything that you said, but I just want to start off with, it's funny for me now hearing you say, oh, I was really impressed with what you were doing, because in going through this, that wasn't what I felt. What I felt was a lot of like guilt and a lot of shame that everybody was looking at me as though I were weak, or that I was making excuses or malingering, and not necessarily because of things that people said, but I think maybe just because in my mind, when you're going through this, there's just so much going on that's hard to filter out. But you're just feeling so guilty on so many levels. And so I think maybe I was assuming a lot of times that the people were judging me, but also just because when I would try and explain things, I couldn't do a good job of explaining it. And so then I wouldn't hear back from you guys what I wanted to hear, which was that, yeah, you understood that this wasn't my fault. And yeah, you understood that, that this was like a real medical condition. And that, yeah, no, you really did believe that this wasn't me, and that the real me was going to eventually come back out again and come into the world, even though you guys were supportive. I mean, that first time, especially when I got off the Ambien, I remember you coming down to the house. Your schedule, I don't remember what you were doing, but your schedule allowed for that at the time. So you would come down, so a few times a week, I think, and help. And I think maybe just help me watch the kids, or maybe while my son was at preschool or something. Or did you ever drive me to appointments when I was trying to get testing done to see what was going on?
I never drove you to doctor's appointments. It was a matter of coming down and just being there when something was needed, and taking care of the children when you were sleeping, when you were getting some sleep during the daytime, and just being there close by so that there was supervision and maybe just a little bit of cleanup in the house, just do some straightening out of the house. But it was mostly just being there. You just needed somebody on hand because you might be able to get some rest. So somebody had to be around on hand. As the time went along, I knew something was wrong. I knew that it was real. Because of my experience with you, and that I knew that you were a strong person, you were not a malingerer, and that you didn't have issues with depression. And so I knew that it was real. I just didn't know what it was. And all anybody can do who knew you was to support you. But I can see where people don't know, they can make all kinds of assumptions. They've never seen anything like this before. They don't understand what's going on. Especially a person who might have some history of depression. It is easy for people who don't understand to think, oh, that's all it is. The combination of people who have a history of depression and they're dealing with the now benzodiazepine withdrawal, and a doctor who's saying, no, there's nothing to it. They can come off this easily. And so you have that kind of history, and then a doctor saying it should not be a problem. And here's this person in the middle that is suffering and going through the agony of withdrawal, and maybe not getting the support they should get. So that can be a real issue.
Yeah,
I really feel for those people. I wonder how they manage.
I mean, if you were to get online, even maybe just looking at some of the comments that people make under my videos, or if anyone just goes to these support groups, you'll see it can be pretty brutal. People are left without a home. Sometimes they're left without any financial support. I mean, you saw how I was. You know, there was absolutely no way I could have earned an income during that time. That just would not have been possible. So I recognize how lucky I was during that time to have some support, even just financially through my spouse, right? But and with the kids, I see women having to give up their children to exes and things like that, or vice versa, you know, men to spouses that they don't believe are reliable or have their children's best interest at heart because they just have no other option. And it's heartbreaking. It's truly
right.
heartbreaking.
Yeah, I can see that happening in many cases.
Yeah. You also mentioned that, well, just your desire really to see that medical professionals are somewhat competently trained on how to deal with this. And I know there are many out there who feel that way. There are prescribers who have joined the Alliance for Benzodiazepine Best Practices, of which I'm a part, because once they realize there's a problem, which they didn't know before, essentially, until either the Alliance or their own patients made them aware. And even as prescribers who are dealing with things like addiction, they're saying, why do we not have this research? Why do we not know how to help get our patients off? And so they're looking, and so then they join us because they're like, this is so needed. We recognize that there is this massive deficiency, and we want to help provide this. So going on, just so people kind of get a framework. So I spent about 4 months going and getting testing done. I had CT scans, I had echocardiograms, you know, and like a tilt table test with the cardiologist. And I mean, I really had every test done. And of course they're all coming back negative. And I remember during that time, again, feeling so guilty, like I needed an explanation that I didn't have at the time to explain to people why I was this way. And honestly, just hoping maybe that I had cancer or that I had some kind of a brain tumor, because then at least that would explain it and there would be some sort of a treatment for this. But instead, I just kept being told, well, you have postpartum depression, you had a breakdown, you had, not by you guys, but like by doctors and maybe some other well-intentioned friends and things like that. I was told that. And so I kept having to like fight that narrative and say, no, there's something wrong with me. But eventually I did kind of just give in to that because I didn't know what else to do. And so I was prescribed the antidepressant, and then I was prescribed the benzodiazepine along with that. And then 3 years later, right, I get off the antidepressant, and then it's time for me to get off. And I'm following the doctor's orders. And he's telling me to cut my pill by a quarter and then by an eighth. And I just can't do it. And so then that's when you guys must have seen sort of this oh no, this nightmare kind of reviving itself of this is happening to Jocelyn again. What's going on? And so at that point, I actually had been technically diagnosed with depression or whatever, because I was on an antidepressant. So when you saw me going through this deja vu, okay, it's happening all over again. What were your thoughts?
Thoughts were, what is it? Why is it happening? See, again, it comes down to experience. People do not have experience with this sort of thing, and just feeling how awful this must be. And also for the doctors, they have no experience with this. You know, they put people on benzodiazepines, they take them off benzodiazepines, and they may have never had experience with anybody who needed taper, and they might not believe it. They believe anything else, because especially, like, for instance, with you, they don't know you. I did. I knew the difference. And so to watch you go through that was difficult, but very difficult not being able to do anything about it. You had support, as you mentioned. You had spousal support. You had financial support in your home. You were able to do what you had to do. Many people don't have that kind of support, and I just don't know how they make it. That's where the doctor has to come in and to really, really help. Take the time to deal with the patient and to help this patient get off the medication in a proper way so that they can do it and stay off it. It requires doctoring, and doctoring takes time. If the doctor is willing to put in the time, they can help the patient.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, it's just about listening. I mean, because even still, the Alliance has put out a book now that is sort of the Benzo book, but how accessible that information is to doctors, I don't know. So really what it comes down to is a doctor who's either willing to listen to their patient or not, because most of us are coming in and educating them based off of information we've gotten off the internet, or for some woman without any letters after her name on YouTube, which can be a really difficult situation to put doctors in. But I was just super lucky. I had a family practitioner who was an osteopath. So I think he was a little more open to outside of the box thinking anyway, because of that kind of chiropractic background. But also he knew me really well. And actually he made it really clear to him when I tried to educate him a bit more about how this can happen to people, and maybe, consider crossing them over to Valium and doing this kind of a taper with other patients. He actually made it very clear to me that he wasn't willing to do that. Like, he was willing to do that with me because he knew I wasn't an addict. But no, that wasn't something he'd be willing to do with others, most others.
Yeah, so, it can be difficult.
Yeah. And then, of course, yeah, I know you and I have discussed this before, but you saw when I would have to go in sometimes and see other doctors because my doctor was out of town.
Yeah, I remember that one particular case where your doctor's gone, you have to deal with another doctor, and hopefully he'll give you the prescription you need to continue your taper. And I guess you really had to talk him into it because he wasn't used to it. I guess he just went ahead and trusted what the other doctor was doing because he did not want to do it. And that could mess the whole process up, throw you back months in your recovery process if another doctor gets involved and throws a wrench into the whole work. So that, again, so many things can go wrong in this process where someone is trying to taper off a benzodiazepine.
Right.
And there's just the hope and the wish and the prayer that it will all work.
Yeah, it's definitely treacherous territory for any patient to navigate, especially when you're not, like, you don't have all your faculties and you're trying to come off as normal and not an addict. That's really hard to do because you're not acting like your normal self. I mean, you saw me. I wasn't me, right? It wasn't the Jocelyn that you knew. But to add to that situation, the stressful situation that you're already in through tapering is stressful trying to talk to this doctor, then the added insult to that injury, right? That it's sort of having to go through this process with each person of, well, are you an addict? Are you just drug seeking? which is what that doctor did, right? He was just really giving me he was grilling me and raking me over the coals because he thought, I guess I don't know, snowing his colleague into overprescribing Valium to me or something like that. But yeah, it's really hard because you have the stigma not only of mental health, but then you have that stigma of possibly of addiction. And I don't know, did you ever have to face that? Did you ever have to explain to anybody what your daughter was going through, or that?
No, I didn't talk to people about it. I considered it a private issue. You know, within the family, and to speak to anybody about it, there was no reason to do that. They wouldn't understand anyway.
Yeah, generally speaking.
That's part of the problem to begin with. They wouldn't understand.
Yeah, that's true. At least not until, I feel like, until you have a firm grasp on your own narrative, where you can go back and look at your medical history and say, oh, okay, I was placed on this, and then this happened, and this was an effect of that. And perhaps not even then, maybe not even until you begin to heal and people can see that you're getting better, do I feel like, oh, okay, now maybe they can kind of understand. Did you feel, was there a point or was there a time where you started to recognize that, okay, this really is something that is due to withdrawal and she actually is healing? There is some hope here for this.
I just saw the healing process. Yeah. When I saw anything that was improving, then there was the hope. But it has been a long process. And even after the medication is stopped, there's still a healing process. The brain has to heal. So it takes years. It really wasn't about what I saw. It really wasn't about how I felt about it or anything. It was just a matter of being there and watching you and being supportive and praying and hoping that everything would be okay for you. That's all anybody can do. Just not criticize, not think the worst, and just be patient and be supportive. That's all anybody else can do.
I imagine, though, how I know now actually how frustrating that is, dealing with a son who is dealing with this illness, this autoimmune / iatrogenic illness that was triggered by a medication that he was prescribed. I know how frustrating it is to want to be able to do something, to want to help, how hard it is even, I guess, to not try and say, do this, try this, because you want there to be a solution so desperately. You want to ease their suffering.
People might do that. It's easy just to say, just do it.
Yeah.
You can do it, just do it. It'd be easy to say that, especially if one gets frustrated. That's not the way to go about it. The way to go about it is just to be supportive.
And by just do it, you mean like just stop your medication?
Yeah, just do it, or just get up.
Oh.
Get up, get going. Just get up, get going. Put one foot in front of the other. Mm-hmm. Get going, and you can do it. You can have a good day. You can do it. Well, yeah, that might be, but in this case, no.
Yeah.
Trust that the person is trying. And when they want to try a little harder, or they feel they can do some more on any particular day, then be there to help, but not telling them they have to do it. That is just a matter of mind over matter.
Right.
They can just do it. Well, no. My experience in watching you, it's not that simple. It takes time. And to criticize, it just adds to the problem.
Right. Well, and I think it's really hard not to criticize, because here you're dealing with somebody who they're not all there. They are being irrational a lot of the time. I mean, I'm sure my husband could give you plenty of examples of times where I was not being rational during that. And so here you're having to trust somebody who isn't even the same person that you knew before. And also you have this paid medical professional who went to school for this. And they're often giving you a completely different narrative and saying, no, they just need to, like the doctor that I was told to go see, who was an expert, and he's like, oh, just cut your Valium by 2 milligrams, and here's some Prozac. And yeah, you know what? Some women just have a hard time being mothers. My wife is that way, and I got the sense that meant he prescribed his wife something too, and so some women just can't handle being moms, and so I mean, it's hard enough being the patient not accepting that narrative, right? Because then I'm like, well, maybe maybe I'm not good at being a mom, or maybe I just can't handle life, or maybe it really is that. And then and then you have the doctor telling your loved one that, right? That's really hard to be caught in the middle, I think, between those two.
That's what we were talking about earlier. You have your loved one saying something, this isn't right. You need to do better. You can do better. And the doctor's saying, oh yeah, it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
And so then the person in the middle doesn't understand what's wrong with them. And they start to think it's all their fault. And it isn't. They need the support of those around them and the support of the doctor.
Right. And ultimately, I think I mentioned trust earlier, right? It actually just boils down to trusting. And the irony is that what you're essentially we're saying is maybe you don't place so much trust and faith in these people who we are told to put our trust and faith in, which is these medical professionals, and instead trust your own intuition, trust the love that you have for this person, that maybe there's something there that they're still there inside, and that person is trying to tell you this is really what's going on. And I don't know. I don't know if I'm making any sense there, but that's a hard thing to do, to learn how to trust in those situations.
That's it. That's what has to be done.
Right. That boils down to it. I'm going to be doing a whole video. I've mentioned that a few times, so I'm going to be putting out a video soon on that. It's just maybe hopefully to help people wake up and open up their eyes that these systems that we trust so much maybe aren't quite so trustworthy. But we'll see how that goes. So just to kind of sum up, I guess I would say, in addressing the loved ones who are going through this right now, who have a loved one who's going through benzodiazepine injury or withdrawal, what hope would you have, or advice would you have to give them in this situation?
Well, the advice would be, it can be done. The person who is going through the withdrawal has to do it, and it's hard, and it takes time, and everyone around them has to be patient. They don't need lectures, they need support. Mm-hmm. And to be supportive and understand that it is a long, drawn-out process. And you have to be supportive of the person. And that takes patience. And you have to tell yourself, be patient. Quit trying to tell them what to do, but only be supportive of what they have to do.
Is there anything you would have done differently as far as, looking back now in hindsight?
I don't know. I maybe look more into it, try to understand it more, try to get more information on it. The more you understand, the easier it is. So check out the information that's there. Learn about it and understand it, because the family member is part of the process. You better understand it.
That's true. I know how much it meant to me when I would provide people with information and they would actually respond to it or validate what I was giving like that. That just meant the world to me. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And anytime somebody was just willing to really just sit with me, just be by my side, sit with me, listen, that's all you can do. And that's all really I really wanted. I just wanted to hear that it wasn't my fault. I think we just blame ourselves so much during this. And
that's what happens.
Right. And honestly, that affects our relationships. And I think, again, I think something that I want to convey to those who are going through this is sometimes we project our own feelings onto our loved ones around us. We kind of assume that they're feeling the way about us that we feel about ourselves. And that may not necessarily be true. It may be true. It may or may not. I don't know. But these relationships, they do get strained. They are strained. I mean, in our relationship with you, my husband, mom, it certainly wasn't perfect. I don't want to present this ideal it was just so we all handled this as perfectly as possible. But, there were some things, but but in the end, those relationships do heal.
Yeah.
Ultimately, as I healed, as you guys healed from the trauma, because you experienced trauma too, I would say, as we all healed from the trauma, that I think a lot of healing has taken place over the years.
I think so too. It's not an easy situation when you get off track, when you're not doing what you can do as a family member. You have to get back on track. Yeah, and that can happen. You can get frustrated, do the wrong thing, get right again, and get back on track, and get it all working so the healing process finishes, and you're back where you need to.
Yeah, and again, that takes time, right? For your first year off, maybe I wasn't able to like fully participate in family functions or things like that, but you know, I did, and then we start establishing maybe more habits together as a family again, and so it takes time. It takes time. Yeah,
that's it.
So, well, and I know that's not an easy thing to revisit, so I appreciate you being willing to do that, Dad. Thanks for.
I'm glad to help, and hope this the idea of this, that it will help somebody else.
Yeah, that's my hope.
Make a difference in somebody's life. Yeah,
I think even just for people to be able to relate and say, yes, I can relate, and no, you're not alone, makes a huge difference. So, and I know really that's been your profession, is helping people. That's what you do. Late at night when your daughter calls you up because of her benzodiazepine / fluoroquinolone injury and her joints are all screwy, and Dad, I need an adjustment. You know, you're there. You're there for me. You're there for me in the ways you can be. So thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. Love you, Dad.
I love you. Thank you for the interview.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.